Okay, so Adrian, thank you so much for joining us today. For everybody that didn't read the speaker summaries, Adrian is an adjunct professor at INSEAD, and I think a kind of a serial tech entrepreneur in kind of media tech and education as well. I think I'll just let you introduce yourself, let you get started with your presentation. I'm sure everybody is very keen to hear what you have to say. So let's all virtually welcome Adrian. I think you can clap from Zoom. Adrian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chiara. And first of all, I'd like to start by thanking the whole team who are involved in this great initiative. And thank you, Chiara. Thank you, Ria. Thank you, Anu, and the rest of the students, faculty and staff who I'm sure have been involved from the various institutions. I also want to send out a special thanks to Professor Michelle Rogan, who it's thanks to her that I got connected to Ria and am involved today. So thanks a lot. I don't know if we're able to take people off mute so they can clap for you, for the organizers. Is that possible or not?
I think not, because we're in a webinar format, so people have to clap virtually. I think there's a little clapping icon.
Okay, we need a clapping sound machine, but anyway, I'm clapping for you. Thank you very much.
I think they're all clapping inside.
Okay. And I'm just going to, so first of all, I want to say it's a real pleasure to be here because I am actually an alumnus of Imperial College. I studied electrical engineering. I was at the school 35 years ago, so it's quite a while. I wasn't a child genius, I'm just old, but it was, I have fond memories of South Kensington, and actually I've been fortunate that two of my children also went to Imperial. My daughter graduated last year from biotechnology, biochemistry, and my son actually is about to, in about 55 minutes, or in a couple of hours, he's about to sit his very final maths exam. He's in his final year of maths at Imperial. So we're a bit of an Imperial family. My oldest son is also an engineer. So we've got the STEM subjects covered. And actually my wife's an engineer. So we have STEM covered in our household. And so we're well in a good position, hopefully, to innovate also around all the challenges around COVID. I'm going to now switch to a presentation, and I'll just talk over it, see whether my screen sharing works okay. Okay.
Yeah, let's just let everybody who's just joined know that we'll be, Adrian will be answering questions at the end. So you can write them all the way through, but we'll read them out at the end.
Okay, great. So I'm going to go full screen, so just let me know if that comes over okay.
Yep.
Okay.
I don't see, oh yeah, there we go. Perfect.
Okay. So you can see it okay, Chiara?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Great. So the topic today is disruption and opportunities during and post COVID-19 in media, gaming and education. And it's interesting because I've been, for the last couple of years or so, I've been giving this talk about preemptive disruption, mainly actually targeted at larger companies who are faced with disruptive forces from many directions. And the last one I gave was early February. And then a month later, the lockdown hit in France. That talk was in France, and kind of everything I'd said in my preemptive disruption sort of came into question. You know, when we have such massive disruption, is, you know, all the stuff I've been preaching for the last couple of years, is it relevant in this kind of this scenario, something that we haven't seen in peacetime, such a massive disruption across the board and the global economy being hit so hard. So I'm going to go through some of the things that I think are relevant, even through COVID, and also go through, after I've addressed these three industries, media, gaming, and education, go through some of my more traditional preemptive disruption talk, which I think most of it is relevant even to an exceptional situation like COVID-19. And the reason for media, gaming and education is really because of my professional background over the last 25 years or so. And to give you context, I thought I would maybe just have a very brief introduction to who I am and what I've done over the last 30 years. So I was mid-80s at Imperial College, studied electrical engineering. At that time, I don't know if it's still the case, but there were quite a few students who were sponsored. So you did what was called a sandwich course, a year in industry, 3 or 4 years at university, and then another year in industry. So I was sponsored by ICI, then Imperial Chemical Industries. At one point, it was the largest company in the UK in the 80s. And it was a great program. After my engineering degree, I was able to work for ICI, and actually during my degree, they also sent me on really fun missions around Europe in the summer holidays. So I really am appreciative to that company, which no longer exists in that form, but for what they did for me. Working 2 years as an engineer, electrical engineer, but in chemical plants in the north of England, I realized that I was attracted also to the commercial side of the business, and that I needed to get more knowledge about business in general. So I ended up applying at quite a young age, actually, to INSEAD, and got in, to my surprise, after 2 years of working for ICI, and so ended up spending a wonderful year in Fontainebleau. In those days, INSEAD only had our Fontainebleau campus. Now we have a campus in Singapore, in Abu Dhabi, and we've opened up one recently in San Francisco. And that photo there on my slide is the Fontainebleau Forest. I actually now live again near Fontainebleau, and that's about a kilometer away from where I live. So it's a wonderful part of the world, and I recommend it strongly to anyone who's thinking of moving to France. So after my MBA, there was something that happened which was massively disruptive, but in a positive sense, while I was in Fontainebleau. So I started my MBA in September 1989 and graduated in June 1990. So for those of you who know your history, that major disruptive event was the fall of the Berlin Wall on Thursday, 9th of November in 1989. And even though I hadn't planned it to end up in Germany after my MBA, that's what happened. So this disruptive event, as I say, for a lot of people, a positive thing, not for everyone, led me to a job that I never dreamt I would be doing after my MBA, but working for the German government, privatizing East German assets. So basically it was 2 years of mergers and acquisitions on steroids. We literally had thousands of companies to bring into the private sector. To date, that has been a unique event, and I have this sort of unique professional experience of how to bring companies into the private, whole countries into the private sector. And so as you can imagine, I wait for my phone to ring one day and have Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in on the phone saying they've settled their differences and South Korea and North Korea will reunite. So I can finally, again, apply this rather unique experience. So after working for the Treuhandanstalt, as it was called, the privatization agency, I had by that time fallen in love with Berlin. So stayed in Berlin for another nearly 9 years and ended up becoming an entrepreneur. My first company was a 3D animation studio, which was a positive cash flow, self-funding, profitable company, but difficult to scale. So we stayed as a boutique company in the 3D animation sector, which was very early of using computers basically to do 3D graphics for media. And in our case, we did a lot in architecture. In those days, if you can imagine that something that you can do now on a low-end smartphone, we had to buy computers. Each workstation cost about the equivalent in pounds of £40,000 for the hardware and the software, which is the acceleration of the technology and the capabilities of the technology today are just unbelievable. But that was, as I say, a company that was a real business in that we spent less than we had in revenue, and it was profitable in cash flow positive, but no scalability. So after 5 years of running the animation company, my partner and I sold the company to our employees and started. Basically, we went onto the internet bandwagon. By then, this was sort of 1997. The internet was all around us, and companies and fortunes were being made left, right, and center. So we had one particular pain point when we were running our animation companies, and that we dealt a lot with LA and Montreal for various reasons, and we were making lots of expensive international phone calls. So basically, a good place to start when building a new business, if you have a particular pain point and you have a solution for it, then that's a good start to a business. So we ended up putting our money where our mouths were and set up Germany's first voice over IP internet telephony provider. Which was a disruptor. We didn't use that word in those days, but we were actually a disruptive company in the telecom sector. So we were the David to the Deutsche Telekom Goliath. This company was very different. It was a negative cash flow, needed a lot of investment in infrastructure, and profits were way into the future. So in this particular experience, we dealt with, we had angel investors, we had venture capital investors, we did a Series A, fairly big Series A round. We're negotiating Series B when, as luck would have it, in retrospect, the company was sold in a trade sale to a larger telecoms group. So these two experiences really, affected my life a lot in many ways. Fantastic experience. It was then difficult for me to do anything but entrepreneurship. My family, my 3 kids were born in Berlin, and my wife is French. We decided to move back to France. I reconnected to INSEAD and started teaching pro bono as an alumnus, teaching startup boot camps, that sort of thing, and ended up working on a course which involved a lot of experiential gaming, let's say, for want of a better word, by the students. It became actually INSEAD's most popular MBA elective, and is now actually a capstone for all the MBAs who go through the 1,000 or so MBAs who go through the INSEAD full-time MBA program, and it's also the capstone for the 300 or so global EMBA students we have. And so this, I'll talk a little bit more later about it, but this was sort of a breakthrough in the way we were teaching. It was a gamified experiential, what we now call live case, and I would say we were sort of disrupting a little bit education with that course, and it's now, I'll tell a little bit more the second story to it, how we've taken that methodology and actually turned it into a business. So what I do now is I teach part-time at INSEAD. Ironically, I work a lot with very large companies, even though I haven't worked for a large company since 1989 with ICI, but it so happens, at least pre-COVID, that a lot of the issues that have been worrying companies over the last few years have been disruption. So looking at disruption in many different forms. I mean, all of them seem rather minor now compared to the disruption of COVID-19, but I've been working with companies to help them be more innovative, bring an entrepreneurial mindset in some cases into the company. And so that's what I do day to day, as well as running with my business partner, our education technology startup, our EdTech company, which I'll talk about a little bit about later. So at this point, I wanted to go through and look at what do we mean by disruption, and particularly in the context of COVID-19, what in a way can we do about it, and then look at some examples from media, gaming, and education. So to start with, I looked up in the dictionary what is disruption, and it's a disturbance or problems which interrupt an event, activity, or process. It's, if you look at these other words, disordering, unsettling, turmoil, stoppage, obstruction, they are actually quite negative words when talking about disruption. And I think the best definition I found from a business person was this one where disruption is painful change. And this doesn't necessarily mean that it's negative. There can actually be many positives to it. We're not necessarily talking about COVID right now, but technological disruption, of course, can be very positive. It creates opportunities for new companies to come into play. We've got other kinds of disruption as well, of course, geopolitical, economic, environmental. So all of these, I would say, can maybe be more negative, but again, disruption of any of those kinds does create opportunity as well. And the question is, if you're an incumbent, does the disruption kill you, or can you harness it, embrace it, and go to the next chapter of your company? I mean, we've seen many companies that have failed in that. Unfortunately, if you look at Kodak, of course, they completely missed the digital boat and no longer exist. If we look at Nokia handsets, before 1997, when the iPhone came out, I couldn't imagine using any other phone than a Nokia, but now they're no longer at all in the handset business. So some incumbents have managed better, and I'll give you one example later, but often disruption has caused, especially when it's technological innovation, the disruptive force it has caused some companies to fail. But for you, people doing this challenge, the students, the innovators, the entrepreneurs, I would say overall it's positive. Now, when we talk about Nokia and Kodak and other companies basically failing about disruption, in retrospect now, sitting here in May 2020, those disruptive forces seem rather benign. When we look at this beast here, this COVID-19 virus, and the way that it is decimating economies, jobs, companies, everything seems rather benign. By the way, I want to just point out, if these slides are shared, this is not a scientific representation of the virus. I knocked this up on Blender, the software some of you may know, 3D animation software. So this is my version of the COVID, and it's probably not the right color, the right shape or anything. So don't take this as scientifically accurate. But when we look at this, we ask ourselves, and I've had to question myself, as I said before, is what I've been saying about disruption relevant to such a dramatic thing as COVID-19 virus? Now, when I did this talk before COVID, the first thing I started was most companies get disrupted because they're in denial. So can we apply this to COVID-19? Well, I did, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen the videos. I did some research on my own to check out whether we had any indication that something like COVID-19 could come along, or have we all just been very unlucky and okay, we didn't catch it this time. Well, as I say, you've probably seen the videos, but when you look at these two gentlemen, well, it just so happens that these two very clever people and very prominent people on the world stage actually spoke about this over 5 years ago. In a speech in 2014, President Barack Obama, we miss you dearly, warned about the need for the US to cast aside partisan differences to prepare for an upcoming pandemic. So just Google that, check it out, it's an amazing video. And Bill Gates, who I think we'll all agree is a clever man, insightful again on the world stage, he did a TED talk in 2015 talking about a COVID, warning us of a COVID-19-like pandemic. So the information was out there. So did everybody just have their heads in the sand and we decided to ignore this, or it wasn't a priority? So I think going forward, one of the lessons for our leaders is, we need to pay attention to this other stuff. And, I think we can see parallels maybe with the environment. We've had a wake-up call on the viruses. I think we're ready for hopefully we will be ready for the one, but maybe on the environment, we should all wake up now. We've had the warnings and do something about it. So switching gears a little bit, I want to now move to denial in the media industry. So I specifically wanted to talk more about the film industry, the TV industry, and particularly the streaming services, because I think there are a lot of lessons we can learn in this rather odd situation we're all in, but also going forward once we're out of it, just for business in general. And again, the theme of denial. So back in 2003, a good friend of mine, Johan Sundberg, and I started a stock footage company, basically selling film clips to movie producers and documentary filmmakers and so on. And we developed a really cool platform, and then we thought, hey, wow, this is 2003. 2004, we said, we could use this platform to distribute films on the internet, because people were searching our site for film clips, and this was pre-YouTube, by the way, and they could license films then for their content. So why don't we do it with complete films? So we did a roadshow in 2005, 2006, going around the film festivals and the TV festivals, speaking to filmmakers, saying, hey, why don't you distribute your film on the internet? This could be really great. You can get around all the costs of distribution and the complexity of selling to different regions and so on. If you're making ecological Norwegian films, there's a small market for that maybe in one country, but there's a big market worldwide. We can distribute these all over the place. And it fell flat completely. Oh, sorry, my Siri has woken up. I must have said something that triggered Siri there, sorry. What was really interesting, we failed in that project. There was complete denial of what was going on. And you must be asking, why am I showing a music revenue slide when I'm talking about the film industry? Because it was really odd. A few years before, the music industry had gone through exactly the same thing. You can see where the music industry at a peak of 2000 was, and there was a company you may have heard of, Napster, that came in and were illegally sharing music files on the internet. And the reaction of the music industry was, we're going to kill that thing. We're going to sue the hell out of everybody. We're not going to accept that this is what the customers want, to conveniently have films downloaded. They didn't test what the willingness to pay of the customers for good quality music that they could buy. Instead, they were in denial, tried to resist it, and then ultimately fell. I mean, the figures on this graph show how the music went into rapid decline afterwards. And it took someone like Steve Jobs to come out with the iTunes store to sell music for people to start to take it seriously. So what was odd for me in 2005, 2006 with Johan, when we were going around these film festivals, we were pointing out, guys in the film industry, you're going to go the way of the music industry. So instead of trying to, kill these and attack these pirators, and I don't agree with support film piracy or any copyright material piracy, but they had a proof of concept that people wanted films distributed over the net. They chose to confront it, and in the case of us proposing a solution, said they didn't want that solution. I remember some quotes. I had a documentary filmmaker said to me, Adrian, it will be a cold day in hell when my film is distributed on the internet. So that's a shame, because I think now in 2020, hopefully that particular producer does have their film being distributed by one of the streaming services, because at the moment that's the only outlet for them. So it was basically denial that was a challenge to our business. We were too early. Basically, we're probably 7 or 8 years too early. But I see that denial has been a big factor in businesses either failing or being basically no longer being a player in the industry. And if we look at the figures for the US home video market over the last 9 years, you can see actually the subscription streaming service has grown enormously, and this is only up to 2018. I don't have the more recent figures, but we see that we're talking about over $10 billion in value there. I wish I'd had a slice of it. I wish we'd started our company 7 years later, but we missed the boat on that one. But you can see that pretty much now this is, especially now with COVID, this is how the industry operates. The streaming subscriptions an extremely important part of the revenue base for a media home video market or film business. So let's take a look at two of the winners, let's say, in COVID. Now, these are really probably not surprising figures, but are quite amazing. And I'm sure for those of you who are in lockdown, now you probably feel it, you're probably contributing to these figures. But if you look at Netflix, in Q1 this year, and most of those new 15.8 million subscribers in Q1, a lot of them were just in March. So we're not even including April and May. This is just Q1. So they now have a total of 183 million subscribers as of 23rd of April this year. And so they had, going up to, just in Q1, they had nearly a 10% increase in their subscriber base. And this is a company that's 20 years old. We all think that Netflix is brand new, but this is a 20-year-old company. That's pretty impressive and exciting figures for their shareholders. And then look at Disney Plus. Now, this is an interesting one. Disney, which is an incumbent company, they launched Disney Plus in the US on the 19th of November 2019. By 23rd of April, from a base of 0, they gained more than 50 million new subscribers. That is amazing. And if you look at from the 28th of March to the 23rd of April, they got more than 15 million subscribers just in those 3.5 weeks. And that's incredible. And actually, it's quite interesting. Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, he's been pretty impressed by Disney Plus too. And he said, this is a quote from Reed Hastings on Disney, he said he has never seen an incumbent learn new tricks so quickly. So yeah, kudos for Disney Plus. They have managed actually to become what I think are one of the 2 most successful media companies during this COVID-19 crisis. So what's the downside? Well, I think what we're seeing with Netflix, and it's really interesting. Reed Hastings, very pragmatic person. He said in the quarterly report on their results, yeah, we've had this massive growth now, but he was actually surprisingly negative on the future, saying, hold on, everybody, don't get too excited. It might not be so good in the future or after lockdown. So when we look at pre and during and post lockdown, so there are a couple of things that could be difficult for them. Well, one is that they have this production pipeline that's stalled right now, and this is not just for Netflix. This is anybody in moving pictures industry. You can't produce. Actors and actresses are sitting at home just waiting for this to finish. We can't obviously have lots of actors and producers in a typical film set or TV set. There are a lot of people involved. It's very difficult to do social distancing. I was listening to the Mark Kermode film show the other day, and they're actually some productions actually thinking of just taking the whole production crew to a hotel somewhere, locking down for 2 weeks to make sure nobody has the virus, and then staying just them in this hotel for a month and make the film. So those are some extreme solutions. But this production pipeline being stalled is a problem for everyone, not just Netflix. And then interestingly for Netflix, they've pointed out that, yeah, we've had this great growth during the COVID-19 crisis, but we've maybe got subscribers now that we would have got 1, 2, 3 years down the line. So they believe that their growth will slow quite a lot during after the lockdown. And then Disney Plus. Okay, what's negative for them? Okay, they have the advantage that they have this massive Disney library, and that's nice, a large library, but it's finite. They don't have the same production machine that Netflix has. So Netflix, on the other hand, does have the advantage, and actually this has helped them with the production pipeline being stalled. They actually have a base right now of quite a few completed television series, and television series takes longer to watch than a single film. So Netflix, this production pipeline stalling might not hit them until a few months down the line, whereas Disney, they're not making any new content, and they have the threat of potentially very, very cash-rich competitors like Amazon and Apple, who are being somewhat successful but haven't yet actively are not in the lead, but once they decide to turn things on, they can put a lot of cash into this. They put a lot of cash into production, and that would probably threaten Disney Plus more than Netflix. And also, there's an interesting dilemma for Disney in that they have a route. Say if they have their own Disney Plus channel, and if they say, okay, we're going to not distribute any Disney films anywhere else. So that means if I want to watch a Disney film, I have to sign up for Disney Plus. That's another $10 or whatever the price is per month for another platform. So maybe there are a lot of people who don't love Disney films enough to want to have a subscription. They occasionally watch a Disney film. So actually going for that, you're only going to be able to buy Disney films from us and not from many of our competitors. That could ultimately be a problem. In that, I'd say, well, you know what, maybe I'll just stick to Netflix or Amazon or Apple and have a large base of content that's actually growing every day. So that has yet to be seen. And of course, I haven't spoken about the real losers because it's quite obvious right now, and I really dearly do hope they survive. If we look at cinemas, that obviously is tragic. I feel very sorry for cinema owners right now. I love going to the cinema, but obviously that's just not possible. And so has yet to be seen whether they can get back on track once lockdown and social distancing has eased. But I think I would ask them to look to other innovators in the cinema industry for inspiration. I'm a big fan of the Secret Cinema, started by Fabienne Rigal in 2007, which has kind of changed the whole experience of going to the cinema. You're part of the production. You're part of the experience. It's gamified. It's fun. It's a whole evening out. It's expensive, but I think cinema owners and other people on the periphery of the film industry or the media industries that have been hit really hard through no fault of their own just have to think about how can we innovate and maybe do something new, change the experience. So let's move over to the video gaming industry, where it's harder to find any negatives during COVID. I think anyone who has teenage kids or siblings at home has probably observed this extreme increase in the amount of gaming. I think some of the figures say that in certain age groups, the use of video games in the last 2.5 months has gone up something like 115% was one figure I saw. Video gaming industry is a big winner during COVID. And it was already at a market size of $135 billion or so in 2018. And this is really amazing. In North America, and so I don't have the figures worldwide, but in North America, game sales went up by 34% in March 2020 compared to March 2019. Hardware sales went up by 63%. I mean, these are big numbers on an already big industry. Interestingly, the 2012 game Plague Inc. became the top paid app on several regional app stores for obvious reasons. So I was asking, wow, this just looks like it's just a win, because even when COVID's over, kids will have got maybe addicted to some new game or something and continue playing. But are there any negatives? And yes, there are some darker clouds on the horizon, or things that have restricted actually the growth to date. And so if we look at those, the industry events, a very important part of the video gaming industry. So the E3 2020, which is the main trade fair for this industry, was cancelled. There's a lot of money in arena esports, where they have these big competitions and in stadiums. I think you may have seen one last year, which was around Fortnite, which was quite famous for just the size of the competition and the money involved. So those have all been cancelled. Any in-person arena events. And then financing for smaller companies in this industry has been hit. So a lot of the smaller companies have not necessarily won during this COVID-19 pandemic. if you look at companies like that, just the E3 2020 event being cancelled, a lot of those companies, smaller companies, would go to those trade fairs to meet investors, do licensing deals and so on. And that has unfortunately to a certain extent dried up. And then there's been a lot of disruption in the console supply chain. There have been delays in the Nintendo Switch production. The new Konami TurboGrafx X16 Mini launch has been postponed completely because of supply chain issues. Also, while the industry has been able to continue programming the games, so the coders have been at home coding the games, there's, in some of the higher budget productions, there's a lot of performance capture. So motion capture, which needs to be done in a studio, needs to be done with people in person. That has ground to a halt. And also, funnily enough, and maybe not surprisingly, a lot of companies have seen lower productivity among the coders working from home. Now, I think this is probably due to, if you have someone working in the gaming industry who's a coder in the gaming industry, and they get to stay at home all day, you wonder maybe they're playing games rather than creating games. So that's maybe an obvious one. Interestingly, Plague Inc., just to finally refer to them again, they were temporarily dropped from the Apple Store because Apple was worried about the dissemination of maybe misleading information. I think they're back on, I just checked earlier. So overall, it's been very positive for the gaming industry, likely to sustain, but depending on how long the social distancing and so on, there could be problems with production in the same way as with the films, and generally just lower productivity. But I wanted to make a special mention to Animal Crossing New Horizons. I spoke to my internal consultants, those are my kids. What is the game that's probably been the winner in this? And Animal Crossing New Horizons has definitely been a big winner during this pandemic, and it's funny. This is a game which is not violent. There's no guns. It's a friendly, lovely game, and some various social scientists are wondering whether it's because it's the perfect pandemic-free paradise that you can escape to. So I think that was quite positive. I was pleased to see that it was a game which is positive in its message, that has been one of the big winners this year. It's funny, when we look at apocalyptic films from the past, they tend to be very, very negative, with everybody going around killing each other. It's been interesting that this pandemic has shown there is something positive about humans when faced with a crisis. So that's the good news. So I just want to finish up in terms of the industry, and sorry, I'm running a couple of minutes over time, just looking at the education industry, which is the industry I'm in. And I think all of you recognize this photo on the left here. And what's interesting, this photo, you can tell it's fairly modern because of the lighting, but I could have taken a similar photo or done a similar painting 200 years ago, and the classroom would not look very different. So I think one thing that we've been woken up to, and as a teacher myself, and in class delivering, and something that I've been asking as I do my work in innovation education, are we teaching in the most effective way? So I think this COVID-19 has been a wake-up call. We've been forced, and my colleagues have been forced to teach differently. And I think, and not all of us, not everybody has embraced it in the best way. I think in a lot of universities and schools, it's just been a knee-jerk reaction. We'll just put everybody on Zoom and just replicate what we do in the classroom, which isn't a good way of using the technology. And I think many of you who are still in university would probably attest that the Zoom lectures, and we're all getting, I think, a little bit zoomed out. So let's hope that we don't miss the boat, but that we're able to also integrate other elements into the way we teach, not only online, but in person as well. And here's some of the things that I've been thinking about with my company and that we're trying to implement. So we see a way of making, and particularly in online, but this does apply to a certain extent to in-person as well, bringing in gamification into education, storytelling, role plays, something that's more immersive, interactive, and engaging. So rather than just sitting in a classroom listening to a 2-hour lecture, whether it's online or in person, is that the best way of getting the students to learn. So I don't know that effective yet in learning. And just to give a little plug for my company and some of the things we're actually doing is our company is called livecase.com, and on the left you have a screenshot. What we try to do is both in person and online, we try to combine the synchronous experience where you can have some classes all together, the asynchronous self-paced where teams or individuals can go off and learn at their own pace over a certain amount of time, and bring in, basically live the learning is our catchphrase. And why live case? We're real believers in the traditional case methodology. It's been in business education. Those of you who are at the business school will, I'm sure, have read lots of cases during your studies, and it's a very effective way of learning. You read a case about something that happened to a business or an individual, and you debate it with the professor or with your team. And so what we do is we've built on that. We see ourselves as the next generation of the case study methodology, where you, rather than just reading about the case, you actually live through it. So it's like a simulation where you go and you take different roles in the company. It's fun. It can be in teams. It can be individual on particular subjects, and so that's how we believe we can make education more effective. So finally, to really finish now, I just wanted to very quickly just run through some tips for those of you working this week on new businesses inspired by COVID, and maybe some just general tips for innovation, entrepreneurship, and benefiting from the opportunities of disruption rather than being menaced by it. So the first thing is customers and pain points. Whatever you're doing, be sure you know who your customer is and what their pain points are. And you may have different customer groups. Analyze very carefully what the pain points are, what the customers are, and one thing that I find as an engineer that I've wasted several years of my life just building really cool things that nobody wants. So try and avoid that engineer syndrome of putting lots and lots of features in place. Rather use a great tool, which is the value proposition canvas, where you can check and calibrate that the features I'm creating are actually meeting true customer needs and customer pain points. And this applies to products as well as services. And then this is maybe more advice to your older colleagues. So those of us who've been in a particular industry for a long time, you need to get out of the office. You need to go and see other industries, what they're doing, learn from what other industries are doing, go and visit the university labs. Now, fortunately, some of you are already on location to visit the university labs, but I advise CEOs of large companies, they say, go and spend a week in a lab at Imperial College and see what's happening in biochemistry, because those innovations and that deep research that's been done today, it might only be commercial, you might only be able to benefit commercially from it in 10 years' time. So you want to make that investment today for the future. Data, we have data all around us. You're a very fortunate generation that you understand data. Some of you are learning artificial intelligence and machine learning. Many companies today have lots of data available. Many new companies build their whole value proposition around the data. So definitely use the data, have the data component, and no matter what you're doing. Even some companies more traditional, I worked with a tire company that are now putting sensors in their tires. There's nothing more basic than a tire, but they're putting sensors in their tires so they can detect how the drivers are driving their vehicle and the effect on the tire and so on. So data is everywhere, even in maybe more mundane, what would in quotes mundane industries. Leverage those hidden assets. There are lots of assets around. If you're in an existing company, if you look at the case of Alibaba, for instance, they realized they had lots and lots and lots of data on transactions being made by small and medium-sized businesses. They set up a bank, and that bank is able to do a credit check more accurately than traditional banks by just analyzing the data on a particular small or medium-sized business that's looking for a loan. They can do a credit check in 2.7 seconds, and it's better. They have a better return or better payback of those loans than traditional banks who take typically 30 days to do the same thing. And constantly analyze the business model. At this point, I'd mentioned the business model canvas, which you may have come across. It's related to the value proposition design created by Alexander Osterwalder. It's a really simple way of presenting your business in one diagram. So, and then constantly analyze the business model as you develop, and especially in, in a new company, in your new businesses, things change quickly in those first few months. They continue to change. You need to constantly analyze your business model, but especially at the first year or two of a business where you'll be calibrating your model. And that's a good segue into the lean methodology. I love lean. Lean is a way where you do things faster. You get your product or service out there with a minimum viable product, not a minimal product, but a minimum viable product that people are willing to pay for. You get it out early, you get feedback from your customers, you iterate and relaunch. And then finally, one thing that interests me particularly, and again, there's a bit of a COVID relation to me. This is me here in my home factory, which is manufacturing face shields for some of the health workers here in the Fontainebleau area. And I'm there with my very cheap 3D printer producing these things, and I think there's going to be tremendous opportunities and change in the supply chain, the digital manufacturing, the being able to 3D print things. I think supply chain, right post-COVID, I think there's going to be a particular opportunity for bringing manufacturing closer to the customer, because of, we've seen very negative things in having this global supply chain, which of course is difficult to get rid of it completely, but I think we're going to see more opportunities in local manufacturing. And then finally, and these really are my final words, this is a phrase that it's a misquote of Gene Kranz, who is the Apollo 13 moon landing mission lead flight director in 1970 during the Apollo 13 crisis. And he was misquoted as having said failure is not an option. He did not say that, actually. That was a misquote. I think it was Ed Harris who was the actor in that film. And actually what Gene Kranz really said was, as they were trying to resolve this terrible crisis to get these astronauts back safely to Earth, he said, we have to consider every option except failure. That's what he said. And I think failure is not an option is not a mantra anywhere I would use in business, especially if you're looking at innovation, you're trying to create something new. I would say failure is essential. You need to experiment, you need to try, if you don't experiment, and fail. Failure for me is an investment. So see failure as an investment. Now, we don't want to encourage failure, but we need to embrace, and I would go as far as to say celebrate failure. That picture of someone in a lab is because that's how scientific experimentation and progress works. So we need to celebrate failure, not encourage it, but celebrate it when it happens, see it as an investment in future success. And then I would encourage you all to reward success, really reward everybody who's been involved in the success of your company, your organization, reward them generously, share the fruits of that success. And obviously that's our goal, to reward success. But finally, what I would also encourage you to do is to punish inaction. In this world with things like COVID-19, pre, post, and during, you cannot just sit back and do nothing. So if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a business person, even if you're working in an NGO or a governmental organization, we cannot do nothing. We have to do something. So thank you very much for your attention. Sorry for going over a few minutes, but I hope we still have time for some questions.
Thank you, Adrian, so much. Yeah, I think we can open up for questions. If anybody has any, you can put them in the little Q&A box in the bottom. We have about 7 minutes, maybe 1 or 2 questions.
Okay, sorry.
No worries. Well, I have one since nobody's writing any. They're probably typing.
I saw a few
Um,
hands go up during the presentation. I don't know if there were.
did they? Well, if anybody
Yeah,
wants to put their hand up and ask a question, that's perfectly fine as well.
Yeah, go ahead and raise your hand. And
but Chiara, why don't you go with the first
In the
question?
meanwhile, no, so you talked a lot about how incumbents have been affected, which is hugely insightful, I think, for entrepreneurs. But for all the aspiring entrepreneurs in the room, have you identified any gaps in the media or education or gaming industry that you think really stick out and need urgent action or offer opportunities for entrepreneurs right now?
Mhm. Wow. Well, if we look at the media industry, just talking to some friends of mine who are actors or directors and in lockdown, if someone can figure out a way of being able to shoot a film remotely, you know, we can do it with radio. I mentioned Mark Kermode, who, fun enough, speaks about film, but he, one of my favorite podcasts is the Simon Mayer and Mark Kermode podcast. And this is an inside joke, but I need to say hello to Jason Isaacs. That's an in joke for those who listen to that podcast. But they're still able to do their radio show. They're still able to do their podcast, even though they're in different places. So if anybody could come up with a good solution for being able to film a movie or a TV show remotely, that's a pain point. As I said before, I think the best opportunities is where you see pain. So what are the pain points that are there right now? And so that's just one off the top of my head. I think there will be. It's interesting. It's difficult to say, and it depends on how fast the normalization is. I think there's going to be opportunities in-person events with social distancing. If someone can come up with a solution to that, how can we have an event that's safe, that respects the social distancing, and we can still have a good time? So those are just two things off the top of my head.
I think it's really, really important to share these kinds of insights because a lot of people are kind of stuck at home and it's hard for them to see what the pain points are in these industries. So I think it's important for people like you who do see them on a daily basis to be able to share them as well. So thank you for that. I have a question here in the chat box. How do game companies prevent competing game companies from stealing their IP or game design?
Okay, that's wow. That's a good question. I come across it a lot, and it is, people are particularly paranoid, I'd say, in the media industry about loss of IP. You know, I've been in script pitches where, you know, you've had to sign tons of legal documents just to hear the pitch. I think it's probably easier to steal IP if it's a story, and so I get it, you know, and if you've come up with this great story and you pitch to people, it could be. So happens surprisingly not that often, and I would say it happens very rarely in startups, when it's a startup business idea. Okay, so I've had people not want to speak about their startup. It's much better to communicate your startup idea to as many people as possible, quite frankly, unless you've found a new way of making energy directly from water or something, and you've got some molecule that you've invented. Yeah, there you need to get it all locked up in with patents and so on. But often it's the execution that makes an idea fail or succeed, not the idea itself. Especially many ideas in the services business or the internet space. You know, I've got an idea for this app. Probably 100 other people have thought of that idea, but what either didn't. They say, there's a quote saying, you're already 90% there if you make one phone call about your idea, you know, because most people just do nothing. I have this idea and never do it. Specifically on the gaming industry, I think it's a bit of a mix between the film and a film and then a startup. And I think, yeah, if you have a new concept for a game and it's just a concept, I'm not sure I would go to a conference and talk all about it. But I think you're way ahead if you have some kind of a first version of it. It's hard for me as a competitor to catch up and just copy you. So I think it comes to the lean methodology. Get it out, get a version of it out there quickly. get people using it, get some traction, and then it's much harder for somebody else to steal the idea.
Great. So we have another couple of questions. I don't know if you're running out of time or if you can.
No, I'm fine.
You have a little bit of time to answer them. Yeah. Okay. Great. So until the next speaker comes on, he's meant to come at 12. We can just keep answering questions if that's fine with you.
Fine with me, yeah.
Great. Okay. So concerning the ongoing digitization of the education landscape, do you expect there to be a fragmentation of the number of players, or similarly to the music and video business, a concentration?
Wow, that's a clever question. So,
from Johan.
Okay, well, thank you. I would say, well, for start, I think in the education business is maybe just a bit friendlier. So we, with our company LiveCase, we just signed a deal. This is hot off the press, by the way, last week with Harvard Business Publishing. And Harvard Business Publishing are in some ways a competitor to us because they have a product portfolio of simulations, which is enormous, and they're the biggest traditional case distributor. But it's kind of are we competitors? Are we partners? So in this case, we're going to do a trial partnership for a year where they distribute our live cases, and even though they're distributing competitor products, so I think there's going to be, maybe in the education business, it's a bit more fragmented, I would say. So it's easier for people not necessarily to be directly competing. And there's so many different products doing different things. I mean, if we look even on the communications side, where you'd think it would be, there'd be only one, once you've chosen one platform, you wouldn't move to another. So you look at Zoom, Skype, WebEx, these all do the same thing, but I've got all three of them, and I use one or the other depending on who I'm speaking to and where they are. I think Zoom actually has somewhat won the game during COVID, at least in education. But I think there's a place, I don't know if I'm directly answering the question, but I think there's a place for people to find their space.
I think that does answer the question. So next one is from Deborah. In '95, the management of Universal thought music would be personalized and delivered through the TV. The focus was digitizing the back catalog. Do you think it was missing a digital revolution or missing the future customer's pain point, mobility/new music?
Yeah, I think, and you dropped out for a second there, so forgive me if I didn't get all of it, but I think...
Can you see the question?
How do you go? No, I can see the...
I can read it again if you need.
No, it's okay. I think I've got enough of it to... So I think often big companies, rather than looking at what the customer, it comes back to why one of my first things to look at in a new business is what are the customer pain points. So I think what existing companies tend to do, and I think this is the case of Universal in '95, that we've got this infrastructure, we've got these cables or whatever. So what we're going to do is try and build something around what we have, because we have we understand cable distribution or whatever it is, and so we're going to try and build a solution around that without really understanding what the customers want. So I think that's the crux of it, and I think that's the reason Kodak failed. Kodak was a company that really valued and had some fantastic chemical engineers in there who loved the celluloid, they loved the chemicals and all that process and so on. And so they were fixed on, no, this is pure, this is the beauty of what we do. And they didn't realize, or they didn't want to realize, that really what they did was they were an image company. They were a way of capturing people's images of their lives and whatever. And so I think, yeah, maybe I don't know in detail the case of Universal, but I can imagine that was their thinking. Oh, we've got all this stuff, what can we do with it, rather than let's go and speak to the customers and ask what they really want.
We have a great question next up. Do you see online education as an opportunity to democratize access to education, or will it exacerbate the unequal access to technology?
That's a really good question, and something that I'm concerned about. I mean, I think all of us probably on this call on this on this week, working on, you're all coming from great universities, and all of us are quite privileged. I think not everybody's come from a privileged background, but I think we're privileged where we are today. And I think, yeah, there is a real challenge in, you know, if you look at schools in some emerging markets, you know, that don't have access to the internet and so on. So, but I think there's some opportunities to turn things around, where the online education, or at least the bringing in technology into places that have less access to expensive technology, where we could change things. So I'm looking right now at a project in education around the Raspberry Pi. I'm a big fan of the Raspberry Pi. It's those of you who don't know it, and you probably mostly do, it's a little Linux computer. The latest version is super powerful. It costs less than £50. I was doing some calculations recently and talking to some people who are in the social impact investment, and we're saying, you know, we figured out on one Raspberry Pi, if you've got a micro SD card of 64 gig, which costs today, less than £20, you can fit 12 years of a curriculum on that thing. And if I don't know what the distribution model by, if anybody wants to pick up this project, definitely contact me, because I'm not sure what to do about that. I can see a solution. I can see the problem. The challenges are, you know, how do you get this Raspberry Pi into a village in Mozambique, and you know, so what's the distribution model? But with solar energy, you could run the Raspberry Pi, and you'd need to get screens and keyboards. But I was thinking, maybe that's a way, maybe that's an opportunity. So I really hope there'll be more entrepreneurs who try and address these problems, because the solutions are there, the business model isn't. But I think if enough of us are concerned about this, we could make the digital divide less than it is now. But I'm an optimist, like all entrepreneurs. So maybe I'm overly optimistic. But I'd love to pick that up with anyone who would like to take it forward.
I missed the last part, but I think there's no more questions, actually. If anybody else has a question, please drop it in. Otherwise, I think that concludes this session.
Well, thank you very much, Chiara.
Well, thank you so much. That was really insightful, and I think from what I understood yesterday, we have quite a few people thinking about education, thinking about I don't know how many about media, but definitely many about education. And I think this was probably very insightful for them. So thank you for that. And good luck with everything.
Thank you. You too.
That's coming. I hope everybody's safe. And let's keep in touch. Yeah. Thank
Absolutely.
you so much.
And if anybody's interested in talking, well, probably I shouldn't talk to you during this week, but after this week, you know, you can connect to me on LinkedIn. And yeah, thank you very much. Good luck to everyone this week. I'm excited to see the results. And you've got some great speakers lined up. One of them is actually one of my best friends, Stuart Hamilton, who's speaking on Thursday. So enjoy that and all the other speakers in the rest of the week. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Make sure to watch the other talks as well.
Yes.
If you don't have the links, I will send them to you.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Chiara.
Thank you so much, Adrian.
Bye. Bye.
Cool. I thought that was really interesting.